In this video, we're diving deep into one of the most complex, fascinating, and downright bizarre characters in animated television history. We're talking about Stuart Gilligan Griffin, the one-year-old baby genius with a British accent, a football-shaped head, and enough weaponry to level a small country. Over more than 2 decades and hundreds of episodes, Stewie has evolved from a diabolical villain, bent on matricide and world domination, into something far more nuanced, a character whose journey touches on identity, sexuality, friendship, and the very nature of consciousness itself. This isn't just the story of a talking baby. This is the complete timeline and hidden lore of Stewie Griffin. And trust me, it gets weird. Let's start at the very beginning, because understanding where Stewie came from helps explain how he became the character we know today. Family Guy premiered on January 31st, 1999, right after Super Bowl 33, and from that very first episode titled Death Has a Shadow, viewers were introduced to the Griffin family. There was Peter, the bumbling father, Lois, the patient wife from a wealthy family, Meg, the unpopular teenage daughter, Chris, the dim-witted son, Brian, the talking dog who drinks martinis and thinks he's an intellectual. And then there was Stewie, a baby unlike any baby that had ever appeared on television before. Seth MacFarlane created Stewie based on a combination of influences that seemed impossible on paper, but somehow worked brilliantly in execution. The primary inspiration for Stewie's voice and mannerisms came from English actor Rex Harrison, particularly his performance as Henry Higgins in the 1964 musical film My Fair Lady. MacFarlane wanted that specific upper-class British sophistication, that theatrical delivery that made every line sound both refined and slightly sinister. He also drew influence from Mr. Burns on The Simpsons, taking that character's elderly villainy and transplanting it into an infant's body. The juxtaposition was immediately striking. Here was a baby who spoke in complete sentences with an advanced vocabulary, who plotted elaborate schemes, who treated adults with contempt, and who seemed to possess knowledge and abilities far beyond what any one-year-old should have. The character design itself was distinctive and memorable. Stewie's head is shaped like an American football or rugby ball, elongated and oval rather than round like a normal baby's head. And there's actually a cutaway gag in the episode Stuck Together, Torn Apart that suggests his head became this shape after he hit it on the ceiling while bouncing on a bed. But flashbacks in Chitty Chitty Death Bang show that his head was already football-shaped when he was born. So the show itself can't seem to decide on the origin of this feature, which is typical of Family Guy's loose relationship with continuity. What matters is that this distinctive head shape became instantly recognizable, making Stewie one of the most visually unique characters in animation. His outfit is equally iconic. A yellow shirt with red overalls became his standard uniform, though in the original pilot pitch, his shirt was purple and his overalls were green. The color change happened before the show aired, and it's hard to imagine Stewie in any other color scheme now. The yellow and red became synonymous with the character, appearing on countless pieces of merchandise and making him immediately identifiable, even in silhouette. From the very beginning, MacFarlane voiced Stewie himself, along with Peter Griffin and Brian. This was a deliberate choice. MacFarlane had such a specific vision for these characters that he felt it would be easier to voice them himself, rather than try to explain to another actor exactly what he wanted. This decision proved crucial to Stewie's character, because MacFarlane could adjust the performance on the fly, adding layers of nuance and emotion that might have been lost in translation with another performer. When Stewie is being villainous, MacFarlane leans into the Rex Harrison theatricality, and when Stewie is vulnerable or confused, the voice softens in ways that reveal the frightened child beneath the genius exterior. When Stewie is being flamboyant and campy, there's a musicality to the delivery that wouldn't work with anyone else. The character was an immediate standout. While Peter Griffin might be the nominal protagonist of Family Guy, and while Brian often served as the voice of reason or the audience surrogate, Stewie quickly became what industry insiders call a breakout character. This is someone who wasn't necessarily intended to be the star, but who captures audience attention so completely that they begin to drive the show's direction. Within the first season, it became clear that Stewie episodes got strong reactions. People loved this evil baby. They loved his schemes, his catchphrases like "Victory shall be mine" and "What the deuce," his elaborate plots, and his complete lack of baby-like innocence. Wizard magazine would later rate Stewie as the 95th greatest villain of all time. Entertainment Weekly placed him 45th on their list of the top 100 characters of the past 20 years. IGN named him the best Family Guy character. He won Seth MacFarlane a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Voiceover Performance in 1999, just months after the show premiered. These weren't just participation trophies. These were recognition that something special was happening with this character, that Stewie Griffin represented something new in animated comedy. But here's the fascinating thing about Stewie's creation and early development. He wasn't supposed to stay the way he started. MacFarlane and the writers quickly realized that doing the evil villain baby thing every single week would get old fast. As MacFarlane himself later said in interviews, they found that doing the take over the world thing every week was getting played out and starting to feel a little dated. It was weirdly feeling a little 90s, and if they had kept doing that, the show would be on its last legs. So almost from the beginning, even as viewers were falling in love with evil Stewie, the creative team was already planning his evolution into something more complex and interesting. What they couldn't have known at the time was just how far that evolution would go, or how many unexpected directions the character would take over the next 2 decades. Stewie would become a time traveler, a creator of universes, a best friend to the family dog, a character grappling with his sexual identity, and ultimately one of the most emotionally complex and surprisingly sympathetic figures in the modern animation. But all of that was still to come. First, we need to talk about where Stewie came from, and that means going back to the moment of his birth. According to the episode Yug Yillimaf, Stewie was born at exactly 11:34 in the morning. This oddly specific detail came much later in the series, part of an episode dealing with time travel and reverse causality, but it gives us a precise moment for when Stewie Griffin entered the world. The circumstances of his birth and early development are revealed through various flashbacks throughout the series, painting a picture of a child who was unusual from the very start. In Chitty Chitty Death Bang, we see flashbacks to Stewie as a newborn, to already with his distinctive football-shaped head, already looking at the world with those calculating eyes. One of the running mysteries of Stewie's character has always been his accent. Nobody else in the Griffin family speaks with a British accent. Peter has a Rhode Island working-class accent. Lois comes from a wealthy family, but speaks with a standard American accent. Meg and Chris are thoroughly American teenagers. Even Brian, the talking dog, speaks with an unremarkable American accent. So where did Stewie get this posh British affectation? The show has offered various explanations over the years, none of them entirely satisfying, which seems to be the point. In the season 16 episode Send in Stewie, Please, there's a reveal that Stewie's English accent is completely fake, and followed by him cycling through various other voices, including multiple Seth MacFarlane character impressions, suggesting the whole thing is just a gag, rather than a definitive answer about his true voice. The most likely explanation, and the one that makes sense within the logic of the show, is that Stewie adopted the British accent as a way of setting himself apart from his family. He's a baby genius trapped in a household of idiots. He's someone with the intellectual capacity of an adult, possibly even a super genius, forced to exist in the body of a 1-year-old and surrounded by people he considers beneath him. The British accent, then, becomes a form of performance, a way of announcing to the world that he is not like these other Griffins, that he is something special and sophisticated and separate. It's an affectation born of pretension and desperation, which actually makes it more interesting than if he'd simply been born British, or had some genetic explanation for it. His intelligence is the other defining characteristic that sets him apart from normal babies, and even from normal humans. Stewie speaks in complete, complex sentences with an advanced vocabulary that would be impressive for a college graduate, let alone a 1-year-old. He references pop culture from decades before his birth. He understands complex scientific principles, physics, engineering, chemistry, and biology at a level that would require multiple PhDs. He builds functioning time machines, matter transporters, cloning devices, and weather-controlling machines. He's capable of strategic military planning, economic manipulation, and psychological warfare. In the episode I Never Met the Dead Man, Stewie himself claims to be shooting on a 5th grade level, which is amusing because even that assessment drastically undersells his actual capabilities. The question of where this intelligence came from is never really answered, and perhaps it doesn't need to be. Family Guy exists in a heightened reality where talking dogs go to college and chickens engage in elaborate multi-episode fight sequences with middle-aged men. Stewie's genius is simply part of the show's fabric, an accepted reality that doesn't require explanation. What matters more is how this intelligence shapes his character and his relationships with the world around him. Being this smart while being trapped in a baby's body creates a fundamental tension that drives much of Stewie's character. He has adult desires and ambitions, but must navigate a world designed for infants. He understands complex emotions and social dynamics, but lacks the physical development and life experience to always know how to handle them. This gap between his mental age and his physical age creates comedy, certainly, but it also creates pathos. There's a loneliness to being Stewie Griffin that becomes more apparent the longer you watch the show. He's too smart to relate to other babies, most of whom he views with contempt. He's too young for adults to take seriously, assuming they can even understand what he's saying, which brings us to one of the great ongoing mysteries of the show. Who can actually understand Stewie when he talks? The show has never given a consistent answer to this question. R.S. and MacFarlane has explained that the ambiguity is intentional. At the 2011 Comic-Con panel, MacFarlane compared it to Wile E. Coyote in the old Looney Tunes cartoons, where the rules of reality bend to serve the comedy. He stated that Brian always hears Stewie, and more recently, Chris has started understanding him too. But the writers usually strive for Peter, Lois, and Meg not to hear him, at least most of the time. However, MacFarlane also said that everyone can basically understand Stewie, but they just ignore him or think to themselves, oh how cute when he talks. The rules can be broken for the sake of comedy, so it changes from episode to episode depending on what the story requires. This fluid approach to continuity is very typical of Family Guy, which has never been particularly concerned with maintaining a rigid internal logic. Some episodes show Lois having full conversations with Stewie, understanding everything he says and responding appropriately. Other episodes treat his speech as incomprehensible baby babble that adults simply don't register. The show even made this inconsistency into a meta-joke in the episode E Peterbus Unum, where future students watching a historical video about the Griffins express confusion about whether the family can understand the baby or not. This ambiguity actually serves the show well because it allows Stewie to function in multiple ways, depending on the needs of any given episode. Sometimes he needs to be a secret villain, plotting schemes that his family is unaware of. Sometimes he needs to have genuine emotional exchanges with Lois or Peter. Sometimes he exists in his own world with Brian. I'm the one character who definitely always understands him. The flexibility means Stewie can be whatever the story needs him to be, which has contributed to his longevity as a character. As Stewie moved through his first year of life on television, the show celebrated his first birthday in the appropriately titled episode Chitty Chitty Death Bang. This was a significant milestone because it established that Stewie had officially turned 1 year old. The fascinating thing is that he's remained 1 year old ever since. Despite the show running for more than 2 decades and more than 400 episodes, Stewie is still perpetually 1 year old. This is common in animated sitcoms, where characters don't age in order to maintain the show's status quo, but it does create some interesting implications. The show has occasionally acknowledged this, with characters questioning how Stewie is still 1 year old so long after his first birthday. In Road to Rupert, when Brian tells Stewie he's getting too old to have a teddy bear, Stewie replies with Brian, "I'm 1," to which Brian responds, "Still." It's a small acknowledgement of the absurdity, but then the show moves on because dwelling on it would require grappling with the fundamental unreality of the premise. This frozen age means that Stewie exists in a perpetual state of arrested development, literally and figuratively. He will never grow up, never go through childhood, never experience puberty, never become an adult. In a later episode, Brian points out that Stewie will likely lose his intelligence once he hits puberty, which terrifies Stewie enough to build a machine to keep himself young forever. But that episode treats it as a hypothetical future rather than something that will actually happen, because the show has no intention of ever aging Stewie up permanently. There have been episodes showing possible futures where we see adult versions of Stewie, but these are always temporary glimpses or alternate timelines that get reset by the end. Present-day Stewie remains forever 1, forever trapped at this specific point in development. This creates an interesting dynamic when we look at Stewie's character growth over the years. He can't physically mature, but he can emotionally and psychologically evolve, and boy has he ever. The Stewie we meet in Season 1 is barely recognizable compared to the Stewie of later seasons, not in appearance, but in personality, motivations, and relationships. Early Stewie was pure villain, a megalomaniacal sociopath obsessed with matricide and world domination. He genuinely wanted to kill his mother, Lois, build apocalyptic weapons, and subjugate humanity beneath his rule. Modern Stewie is flamboyant, theatrical, emotionally vulnerable, grappling with his sexual identity, and primarily focused on his friendship with Brian and his various scientific projects and adventures. The transformation has been so complete that it's almost like they're different characters, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. To really understand Stewie's evolution, we need to go back to the beginning and examine each phase of his development in detail. We need to talk about evil Stewie, the original version of the character, the diabolical genius baby who wanted nothing more than to murder the woman who gave birth to him and take control of the entire planet. That's where our real deep dive begins, with the question that defined early Stewie Griffin. Why did he want to kill his mother so badly? The early seasons of Family Guy presented Stewie as a true villain, and his primary motivation was simple and horrifying. He wanted to kill Lois. Not in a metaphorical sense, not as a running gag that was never meant to be taken seriously. Stewie Griffin actively, explicitly, and repeatedly tried to murder his own mother. He built weapons specifically designed to kill her. He plotted elaborate scenarios where she would meet gruesome ends. He spoke about it constantly, often directly to her face, though whether she could understand him varied from episode to episode. And this wasn't subtle dark comedy. This was a baby openly expressing his desire to commit matricide, and the show played it completely straight within its comedic framework. The explanation Stewie gives for this homicidal obsession is both darkly funny and psychologically interesting. He resents Lois for his 9 months spent in what he calls her ovarian Bastille. That's right, Stewie hates his mother because she was pregnant with him. He views his time in the womb as a form of imprisonment, 9 months trapped in darkness, and he blames Lois for putting him through that experience. This is obviously absurd on multiple levels. Lois didn't imprison him, she created him. The womb isn't a prison, it's the natural development space for human life. And most damningly, Stewie was unconscious for most of that time and shouldn't have any memories of it at all. But Stewie, with his hyper-developed consciousness, apparently does remember it, and he's furious about it. This origin for his hatred is quintessentially Family Guy, in how it takes something normal, pregnancy, and reframes it through such a twisted lens that it becomes horrifying and hilarious simultaneously. It also reveals something important about Stewie's psychology. He's someone who views any constraint on his freedom as an unforgivable violation. Being inside Lois's body for 9 months meant he had no agency, no control, no ability to exercise his will. For someone as controlling and megalomaniacal as early Stewie, that loss of autonomy, even before he was born, was enough to justify murder in his mind. His plans to kill Lois were elaborate and varied. In some episodes, he built specific weapons designed to vaporize, freeze, or explode her. In others, he plotted more complex scenarios involving traps, accidents, or manipulations that would lead to her death. The show mined this premise for comedy by having Stewie's elaborate plans repeatedly fail in absurd ways. Maybe his weapon would malfunction at the crucial moment. Maybe Lois would unknowingly dodge his attack through sheer coincidence. Maybe some other catastrophe would interrupt his scheme right when he was about to succeed. The comedy came from the contrast between Stewie's evil genius and his ultimate ineffectiveness, between the horrifying premise and the cartoon reality, where nothing truly dark could actually happen. But the show didn't shy away from showing Stewie being genuinely dangerous and violent. He killed people. Not Lois, obviously, but various minor characters throughout the series fell victim to Stewie's weapons, plots, and rages. The show would often cut away right before the actual death, maintaining some distance from the darkest implications, but it was clear that Stewie was capable of murder and willing to commit it. He engaged in robbery, carjacking, loan sharking, and forgery. He tortured people for information. He experimented on animals and humans. He built weapons of mass destruction, including nuclear devices. This wasn't a villain in name only. This was a character who committed acts that, in a live-action drama, would mark him as irredeemably evil. The psychological complexity of evil Stewie came from the fact that he wasn't just randomly violent or cruel. He had specific goals and motivations, warped though they were. World domination wasn't just about power for its own sake. It was about bringing order to a chaotic world that didn't appreciate his genius. Killing Lois wasn't just about revenge for his imprisonment. It was about removing the one person who still had authority over him, who could still treat him like a baby rather than the superior being he believed himself to be. Stewie's evil had a kind of perverse logic to it, a twisted rationality that made him more interesting than a simple cackling villain. His relationship with his teddy bear Rupert revealed another layer to his character during this period. Rupert was Stewie's confidant, the one being he shared his secrets with, the one he spoke to when he was alone. Stewie would have conversations with Rupert, sometimes imagining Rupert as a muscular man with a teddy bear head, revealing both his loneliness and the early hints of his sexual confusion. Rupert couldn't talk back, obviously, but Stewie projected onto him, using him as a sounding board for his schemes and his feelings. This relationship showed that even evil Stewie needed connection, needed something or someone to care about beyond his goals of matricide and world domination. Rupert was the crack in his villainous exterior, the hint that beneath all the evil genius was a scared, lonely child who didn't know how to connect with anyone in a healthy way. His arsenal during this period was extensive and impressive. His most iconic weapon was his ray gun, a sleek laser pistol that he used constantly throughout the early seasons. This was his go-to weapon for threats, violence, and the occasional murder. The ray gun could vaporize targets, stun them, or simply blast them with concussive force. It was powerful enough to be genuinely dangerous, but portable enough for a baby to carry around. The ray gun became so associated with Stewie that it still featured in most merchandise and fan art of the character, even though modern Stewie rarely uses it anymore. Beyond the ray gun, Stewie built and used a staggering array of weapons and devices. He had a weather-controlling machine disguised as a see and say, the children's toy that makes animal sounds. He had mind control devices. He had time machines, which we'll talk about in much more detail later. He had cloning equipment, and he had teleportation devices. He had a shrink ray that could miniaturize objects and people. He had military-grade vehicles including fighter jets and helicopters. He had access to explosives, poisons, and biological weapons. For a 1-year-old, Stewie had better equipment than most military organizations. The question of where he got the materials and funding for all this was never addressed, because addressing it would require answering questions the show had no interest in exploring. It was simply accepted that Stewie could build whatever he needed. His schemes often targeted not just Lois, but the entire world. In various episodes, he plotted to blow up networks, destroy cities, manipulate stock markets, start wars, and generally cause chaos on a global scale. His ultimate goal of world domination was presented seriously within the show's comedic framework. Stewie genuinely believed he should rule the planet, and he was actively working toward that goal. He saw humanity as inferior, sheep that needed a genius shepherd to guide them, and he was convinced he was that shepherd. This grandiosity was both funny and genuinely unsettling. because it was played without irony. Stewie really believed these things about himself. What made evil Stewie work as a character, what kept him from being just an unpleasant villain that viewers would reject, was the juxtaposition of his evil plans with his baby reality. No matter how sophisticated his schemes, he was still physically a baby, and the show mined endless comedy from that fact. He would be in the middle of monologuing about his evil plans when Lois would blow on his belly button, causing him to collapse into helpless giggles. He'd be scheming destruction when Peter would play peekaboo with him, and despite his best efforts, Stewie would become completely captivated by the simple game, laughing and saying his trademark blast as his evil focus dissolved. He was entranced by Teletubbies and Raffi despite knowing they were infantile entertainment. He needed naps. He had a crib. He wore diapers. This contrast created a specific kind of comedy where viewers could enjoy the dark premise without having to take it too seriously. Yes, Stewie wanted to kill his mother, but he was also just a baby who couldn't resist baby things. Yes, he was building weapons of mass destruction, but he was also taking baths and going to preschool. The show walked a tightrope between genuine darkness and absurdist comedy, and during the early seasons, it largely succeeded at maintaining that balance. Stewie was scary enough to feel like a real threat, but constrained enough by his physical limitations that he remained sympathetic and funny, rather than genuinely horrifying. The turning point for the character came gradually, over seasons 3 through 7, with one particular event serving as a major milestone. The 2-episode arc Stewie kills Lois, and Lois kills Stewie in season 6, represented both the culmination of Stewie's evil arc and the beginning of its end. In these episodes, Stewie finally succeeds in killing Lois, shooting her and pushing her off a cruise ship. The show plays this completely straight, with funeral scenes, genuine grief from the family, and Stewie taking over the world in the power vacuum left by Lois's death. But then, in the second part, it's revealed that Lois survived. She comes back, and she hunts down Stewie to kill him. The episodes end with the reveal that the entire 2-parter was a simulation, a virtual reality scenario Stewie was playing out. This 2-parter was significant for several reasons. First, it gave fans the payoff they'd been building toward for years, showing what would actually happen if Stewie succeeded in his primary goal. Second, it demonstrated that achieving his goal wouldn't bring Stewie the satisfaction he'd imagined. Even in the simulation, killing Lois didn't solve his problems or make him happy. Third, and most importantly, so it gave the show a way to move past this defining aspect of Stewie's character without having to explicitly abandon it. After these episodes, Stewie's attempts to kill Lois became less frequent, less serious, and eventually stopped altogether. The show never announced that Stewie had given up on matricide. He just gradually stopped talking about it, stopped plotting it, stopped making it central to his character. This marked the beginning of Stewie's transformation from villain to something more complex and interesting. But before we fully explore that transformation, we need to talk about one of the most important aspects of Stewie's character, and one of the show's most creative and ambitious ongoing elements. We need to talk about time travel, because Stewie Griffin didn't just exist in the present, and he broke through the barriers of time itself, traveling to the past and future, creating paradoxes, meeting his older selves, and ultimately, as we'll discover, creating the universe itself. The time travel episodes are where Family Guy got to play with science fiction concepts while maintaining its comedic sensibility, and there where Stewie's character really began to grow beyond his evil origins. Stewie's first time machine appeared in the season 1 episode Mind Over Murder. The premise was simple enough. Stewie was experiencing teething pain, and being a genius, his solution was to build a machine that would allow him to travel forward in time to when the teething was over. This is peak Stewie logic. Face a temporary problem that will resolve itself naturally and respond by inventing technology that violates the laws of physics. Of course, the time machine works, but then people copy his plans, and Stewie has to go back in time to prevent the whole sequence of events, effectively erasing that episode's continuity. This first time travel episode established several important precedents. It showed that Stewie could build a functioning time machine, that the show was willing to play with science fiction concepts, and that time travel would have consequences, even if those consequences could be reset by the end of an episode. The time machine itself went through several different designs over the years, reflecting both improved animation budgets and different storytelling needs. Sometimes it was a booth or chamber that Stewie would sit in, similar to the time machine in the H.G. Wells novel. Sometimes it was a return pad, a small handheld device that could lock onto temporal coordinates and transport the user through time. Sometimes it was incorporated into other objects, like a wristwatch in the Stewie Griffin, the untold story direct-to-video movie. The specifics of how it worked changed depending on what the story required, but the basic principles remained constant. It ran on uranium or other exotic power sources. It could travel to any point in past or future. It created potential paradoxes, and it was dangerous. The danger came not from the technology failing, though that happened occasionally, but from the implications of changing the past. Every time someone traveled back in time, they risked altering the timeline in ways both predictable and unexpected. This became a major theme in the time travel episodes, with characters repeatedly going back to fix problems only to create new ones, requiring another trip back, creating cascading layers of temporal interference. The show played this both for comedy and for genuine science fiction storytelling, with episodes that actually engage seriously with paradox theory, grandfather paradoxes, bootstrap paradoxes, and temporal causality loops. One of the most significant early time travel episodes was Road to Germany from season 7. This was the first of the Road to episodes that would become a signature of the show. Episodes that focused on Stewie and Brian going on adventures together to various locations. In Road to Germany, Mort Goldman accidentally stumbles into Stewie's time machine, thinking it's a bathroom, and he gets transported to 1939 Poland, and specifically to the day Germany invaded and World War II began. Stewie and Brian follow him to the past to bring him back, but their return pad gets damaged, stranding them in Nazi Germany. What follows is one of the darkest episodes Family Guy ever produced, even within its comedic framework. The show doesn't shy away from the horror of the Holocaust. The opening scene of a joyous Jewish wedding being interrupted by German Stukas bombing the village is genuinely harrowing, cutting through the comedy with a reminder of real historical tragedy. Stewie, Brian, and Mort have to navigate Nazi Germany while trying to obtain uranium to power their return home. This requires Stewie to impersonate Hitler in a sequence that could have been offensively tasteless, but walks the line through sheer audacity. How when they finally escape back to the present, arriving just 30 seconds before Mort originally entered the time machine, Stewie makes a dark decision. To ensure these events don't repeat, he kills the version of Mort who traveled through time by locking him in a freezer, effectively erasing that version of Mort from existence. Road to Germany established several important patterns for future time travel episodes. It showed that the past was dangerous, that changing history had serious consequences, and that Stewie was willing to make hard, even murderous decisions to protect the timeline. It also deepened the partnership between Stewie and Brian, showing them working together effectively in high-stakes situations. Their dynamic in this episode, with Brian's sarcasm and drinking playing off Stewie's genius and ruthlessness, would become the template for their relationship in future adventures. The next major time travel episode came in Season 10, with Back to the Pilot, which may be the most ambitious time travel episode the show ever attempted. The premise has Brian asking Stewie to help him find a tennis ball he buried on January 31st, 1999. The date of Family Guy's actual premiere. They travel back to that specific day, and the show recreates the pilot episode with the original animation style, complete with Meg being voiced by Lacey Chabert instead of Mila Kunis. This meta-textual playfulness, having the characters travel back to the show's actual first episode, created opportunities for self-referential humor and genuine nostalgia. But the episode takes a dark turn when Brian, ignoring Stewie's warnings not to change the past, tells his 1999 self about the September 11th attacks ahead of time. This allows 2001 Brian to prevent the attacks, and when present-day Stewie and Brian return to their own time, they find the world dramatically changed. Because September 11th didn't happen, America didn't invade Afghanistan or Iraq, didn't implement the Patriot Act, didn't experience the national trauma that shaped the early 21st century. But the show suggests this led to even worse problems, including a second American Civil War that turned the country into a dystopian wasteland. This creates a moral dilemma that the show plays surprisingly straight. Stewie and Brian have to go back and prevent themselves from preventing September 11th, which means allowing thousands of people to die for the sake of maintaining the timeline. When Brian tries to change the past in other ways and creating alternative timelines where the Harry Potter novels were never written or other historical changes occurred, it just creates more problems. Eventually, 50 different versions of Stewie and Brian from various timelines all appear, trying to prevent their past selves from changing history, creating a hilarious and mind-bending temporal knot. The episode ends with all the Stewies taking a vote on whether to prevent September 11th, with the majority voting no. It's a bleak conclusion wrapped in comedy, but it establishes an important principle that would carry through future time travel episodes. The timeline must be preserved, even when that means allowing terrible things to happen. This transforms Stewie from someone who casually changes the past for personal benefit to someone who understands the weight of temporal responsibility. But the most cosmically significant time travel episode, the one that fundamentally changed Stewie's place in the universe, came with the Season 9 episode The Big Bang Theory. This is where things get genuinely weird, where the show stops being just a comedy and briefly becomes legitimate science fiction. In this episode, Stewie and Brian have a mishap with the time machine that transports them outside the space-time continuum entirely. They end up in a realm of non-existence, a blank void where there is no past, present or future, no laws of physics, nothing. It's a terrifying concept played for maximum existential dread, and Stewie realizes the only way to get back is to overload the return pad's reactor, creating an explosion powerful enough to blast them back into existence. The explosion works, and propelling them back into the universe. But a few days later, Stewie makes a startling discovery. He compares the energy spectrum of the return pad explosion to the cosmic microwave background radiation, the signature left over from the Big Bang, and they're an exact match. This suggests, within the show's internal logic, that the return pad explosion was the Big Bang. Following this revelation, Stewie and Brian didn't just escape from non-existence, they created the universe. All of reality, all of space and time, every star and planet and galaxy exists because Stewie Griffin built a time machine that malfunctioned and exploded at the beginning of everything. This creates what's called a temporal causality loop or bootstrap paradox. The universe created Stewie so that Stewie could create the universe, so that the universe could create Stewie, on and on infinitely. There's no starting point, no first cause, just an eternal loop where effect creates cause creates effect. As Stewie explains it, time and space didn't exist before their explosion, because they were outside the space-time continuum. They created the physical universe, which eventually led to Earth, which eventually led to the Griffin family, which eventually led to Stewie, who eventually built the time machine that would create the universe. It's the ultimate bootstrap paradox, and it recontextualizes everything about Stewie's character. He's not just a baby genius. He's not just a time traveler. He's the reason the universe exists. This episode also introduces Bertram, Stewie's half-brother, into the time travel mythology in a significant way. When Bertram learns about the time machine, he uses it to travel back to Renaissance Italy to kill Leonardo da Vinci, who is revealed to be Stewie's ancestor on Lois's side. If da Vinci dies before having children, then Stewie is never born, which means he never creates the universe, which means reality itself ceases to exist. The stakes literally cannot be higher. Stewie and Brian travel back to stop Bertram, leading to a confrontation in Renaissance Italy, where Stewie and Bertram fight with swords and early firearms, while Leonardo da Vinci watches in confusion. Despite Stewie's efforts, Bertram succeeds in killing da Vinci, and the world starts to fade away as the timeline unravels. But then, Stewie realizes something crucial. He and Brian are still alive even after da Vinci's death, which indicates there's still a possibility for Stewie to be born through some other line of descent. Stewie kills Bertram, and the episode's resolution suggests that da Vinci must have had other descendants, or that the timeline found another way to ensure Stewie's existence. Because within the show's logic, the universe requires Stewie to exist in order for the universe itself to exist. It's mind-bending temporal metaphysics wrapped in cartoon comedy, and it's genuinely impressive that Family Guy attempted something this conceptually complex. The time travel episodes establish several important facts about Stewie's capabilities and the show's approach to science fiction. First, Stewie is capable of understanding and manipulating the fundamental forces of reality. He doesn't just invent gadgets. He bends space-time to his will. Second, the show is willing to engage with legitimate science fiction concepts when it serves the story, treating paradoxes and causality loops with more seriousness than you might expect from a Seth MacFarlane comedy. Third, time travel has costs. Brian destroys the time machine in Life of Brian after too many close calls with altering history. And when Brian dies shortly after, Stewie is unable to rebuild it because a crucial component is no longer available. This creates genuine stakes and consequences, showing that even with access to time travel, not everything can be fixed. Later episodes brought the time machine back after Stewie rebuilt it, because it's too useful a storytelling device to abandon forever. Episodes like Stewie, Chris and Brian's Excellent Adventure, Chap Stewie, and various others continued to explore time travel from different angles. The show also expanded into multiverse travel with Road to the Multiverse, where Stewie invents a remote control that allows travel between parallel universes rather than through time. This opened up new storytelling possibilities, allowing the characters to visit worlds where everyone is Disney-style cartoon characters, where humans and dogs have reversed roles, where the laws of physics don't apply, and dozens of other creative alternate realities. What all these time travel and multiverse episodes did for Stewie's character was expand his canvas beyond the mundane reality of the Griffin household. He wasn't just a baby in Rhode Island anymore. He was a traveler through time and space, someone who had seen the birth and death of the universe, someone who had walked through countless alternate realities, someone who had literally created existence itself. This cosmic perspective gradually made his early obsessions with killing Lois and taking over the world seem small and petty by comparison. Once you've created the universe, what's the point of world domination? Once you prevented September 11th and then unprevented it. Once you fought Nazis in 1939 and walked through a universe where you never existed, murdering your mother seems like such a parochial concern. The time travel episodes also gave Stewie something he'd been lacking: genuine friendship with Brian. In their adventures through time and across dimensions, Stewie and Brian developed a bond that transcended their original dynamic, and Brian stopped being just the family dog who could somehow understand the baby's speech. He became Stewie's partner, his best friend, his companion in adventures that no one else in the Griffin family could or would understand. This relationship would become central to Stewie's character development in ways that shaped everything that came after. But the time travel episodes weren't just about adventure and cosmic consequences. They were also a vehicle for exploring deeper aspects of Stewie's character, including the question that had been lurking in the subtext since season 2, and that would eventually become impossible to ignore. They dealt with Stewie's sexuality, his identity, and his gradual realization that he might not be who he thought he was. The hints had been there all along, subtle at first, but growing more obvious over time. The time travel episodes, particularly the Road to episodes with Brian, gave Stewie space away from his family to start grappling with these questions. But before we dive into that complex and sensitive topic, we need to talk about the other major relationship in Stewie's life, his rivalry with the one other baby who could match his genius and his ruthlessness. We need to talk about Bertram. Bertram appeared in only a handful of episodes, but his impact on Stewie's character and mythology is significant enough that he deserves detailed exploration. Bertram is Stewie's half-brother, though the circumstances of their relationship are predictably absurd. It all started in the season 3 episode Mission Impossible, where the backstory was laid out in microscopic detail, literally. And Stewie learned that Lois and Peter were planning to have another baby, and being the youngest child was central to Stewie's identity and sense of importance. He couldn't allow himself to be supplanted by a younger sibling. His solution was to build a shrinking device, miniaturize himself, and travel inside Peter's body to his testicles to destroy all his sperm from the inside. This sequence, which spoofs the 1966 film Fantastic Voyage, shows Stewie navigating Peter's internal biology, fighting antibodies and navigating blood vessels until he reaches the testicles. Once there, he begins destroying sperm cells, but one of them fights back. This sperm is different, more intelligent and aggressive than the others, and it battles Stewie to a standstill. This sperm is Bertram, already conscious and aware even in his single-cell form, just as intelligent as Stewie, and equally motivated by competition and hostility. They fight, and the episode ends with Bertram's fate uncertain. The implication is that he survived and was eventually conceived, though the mechanics of how that happened, given that Stewie was trying to prevent any pregnancy, are left deliberately vague. Bertram returned in the Season 4 episode Sibling Rivalry, and this is where we learn his origin story. Peter was planning to get a vasectomy, but before the procedure, he went to donate sperm at a cryogenic storage facility, just in case he and Lois wanted more children later. While at the facility, Peter accidentally knocked over a large rack of sperm samples, and in his panic to cover up the accident, he replaced all the samples himself. And this means Peter's sperm ended up in vials labeled for other donors. And those vials were used by people expecting completely different genetic material. One of the recipients was a lesbian couple, and they gave birth to Bertram using what they thought was sperm from their chosen donor, but was actually Peter's sperm. This makes Bertram Stewie's half-brother, sharing Peter as a biological father, but having different mothers. When Bertram is born and starts attending the same playground as Stewie, the two recognize each other immediately. Their rivalry from their microscopic encounter reignites, and they begin a war for control of the playground. What makes Bertram interesting as a character is that he's essentially Stewie's dark mirror. He has the same football-shaped head, suggesting this is a genetic trait from Peter's side of the family. He has the same level of intelligence and the same capacity for violence and strategic thinking. He's voiced by Wallace Shawn, who brings a similar theatricality to the role that Seth MacFarlane brings to Stewie, but with a slightly different flavor, more nasal and whining where Stewie is crisp and imperious. Bertram is what Stewie might be without Lois's influence, without the Griffin family, without even the minimal socializing influence that Stewie has received. He's pure ego and aggression. The playground war in Sibling Rivalry is played as a full military conflict in miniature. Stewie has declared himself ruler of the playground, and all the other children bow to his authority. Bertram arrives leading a group of dissenting kids who refuse to acknowledge Stewie's supremacy. They engage in an air battle with Stewie piloting an F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter, and Bertram commanding AH-1 Cobra attack helicopters. The battle is animated with surprising detail and intensity, with missiles flying and explosions erupting across the playground, while normal adults remain oblivious to the conflict happening at their feet. When air superiority proves indecisive, Bertram resorts to biological warfare. He uses a female toddler that Stewie has a crush on to get close enough to infect Stewie with chickenpox, temporarily incapacitating him and allowing Bertram to take control of the playground. When Stewie recovers, he's enraged, and the two engage in a sword fight on the playground equipment, clashing with what appear to be actual steel blades. Stewie eventually defeats Bertram by disarming him, and the episode ends with Stewie and Christopher Moltisanti from The Sopranos digging a hole that viewers initially assume is a grave for Bertram. But it turns out they're just planting a tree, and Stewie reveals that Bertram admitted defeat and ran away. This ending left Bertram's status ambiguous. He wasn't dead, but he'd been humiliated and defeated. When he returned in the Big Bang Theory episode we discussed earlier, he'd clearly been stewing on that defeat and planning revenge. His plan to kill Leonardo da Vinci and erase Stewie from history was the ultimate expression of their rivalry, attempting to not just defeat Stewie, but to make it so Stewie had never existed at all, and the fact that this would also erase the universe seemed like an acceptable cost to Bertram, showing just how deep his hatred ran. In Renaissance Italy, during their final confrontation, Bertram and Stewie acknowledge the full scope of their relationship. They're brothers connected by biology and by their shared exceptional intelligence. But they're also mortal enemies, unable to coexist peacefully because they're too similar, too competitive, too driven by ego to allow the other to live. Stewie kills Bertram, shooting him with period-appropriate firearms after Bertram has killed Leonardo da Vinci. It's played as a necessary act, a kill-or-be-killed situation where Stewie had no choice. But there's also a sense of tragic inevitability to it. Two brothers who could have been allies instead destroying each other, and Bertram never appeared again after the Big Bang Theory, and the show has not addressed whether he's permanently dead or could somehow return. In a show that's brought dead characters back through cloning, time travel, and simple retconning, death is rarely permanent. But thematically, Bertram's story feels complete. He represented the path Stewie could have gone down, the version of Stewie who never moved beyond violence and megalomania, who never formed meaningful connections or evolved emotionally. By defeating and killing Bertram, Stewie was symbolically rejecting that version of himself, closing the door on who he used to be and opening up to who he would become. The Bertram episodes are also significant because they're some of the last where Stewie is truly villainous. After the Big Bang Theory, Stewie's character softening accelerated. He stopped plotting world domination, stopped building weapons of mass destruction, stopped engaging in the kind of sociopathic violence that characterized his early years. Killing Bertram, his dark mirror, marked the end of evil Stewie and the beginning of something new. And that something new would require Stewie to confront aspects of himself that he'd been avoiding or denying since the beginning. It would require him to grapple with questions of identity and sexuality that are difficult for anyone, let alone a baby genius with a fake British accent and unresolved maternal issues. The evolution of Stewie's sexuality is one of the most controversial, discussed, and ultimately fascinating aspects of his character development. From season 2 onward, the show began dropping hints and small moments and jokes that suggested Stewie might not be straight. These hints grew more frequent and more explicit over time, creating a running subplot that played out over literally hundreds of episodes. What started as occasional gags evolved into a central aspect of Stewie's character, one that the show has handled with surprising thoughtfulness, despite Family Guy's reputation for offensive humor. The earliest hints were subtle enough that casual viewers might miss them entirely. In episodes like Chick Cancer from season 2, Stewie makes comments about finding muscular men attractive. In later episodes, his cell phone screensaver is revealed to be a picture of a muscular shirtless man. He has a photo of actor Chris Noth in his wallet. He makes suggestive comments about male celebrities. He refers to other men as handsome or attractive, in ways that go beyond mere aesthetic appreciation. He shows an encyclopedic knowledge of musical theatre, which the show treats as a stereotypical gay interest. He displays behaviors and mannerisms that are coded as gay according to cultural stereotypes: fastidiousness, love of fancy things, artistic sensitivity, and a general flamboyance in how he carries himself. As the series continued, these hints became less subtle. Stewie would be on the verge of coming out in episodes like Turkey Guys and Send in Stewie, Please, interrupted for comedic effect at the crucial moment. He'd make comments that strongly suggested he was attracted to men, then immediately backpedal or deflect. The show began treating Stewie's sexuality not as a joke, but as genuine character development, and a real question that Stewie himself was grappling with. He didn't know if he was gay, and the show was exploring his confusion and denial in ways that, at least occasionally, felt authentic rather than mocking. Seth MacFarlane has spoken about Stewie's sexuality in several interviews over the years, and his comments have evolved along with the character. In a 2009 Playboy interview, MacFarlane revealed that the show had actually scripted an episode where Stewie comes out as gay. The episode, which was never produced, would have dealt with harassment Stewie took from other kids at school for being different. In response, Stewie would have traveled back in time to prevent the passage in Leviticus that condemns homosexuality from being written. MacFarlane said that they ultimately decided it was better to keep Stewie's sexuality vague, both because he's technically only 1 year old, and because the ambiguity allows for more creative freedom in writing the character. In that same interview, MacFarlane stated, "He originally began as this diabolical villain, but then we delved into the idea of his confused sexuality. We all feel that Stewie is almost certainly gay, and he's in the process of figuring it out for himself. We haven't ever really locked into it because we get a lot of good jokes from both sides, but we treat him oftentimes as if we were writing a gay character." This was a significant statement because it confirmed what many viewers had suspected. The creative team believed Stewie was gay, even if they hadn't explicitly confirmed it on the show. MacFarlane also speculated that when Stewie grows up, he'll ultimately become either a homosexual or a very unhappy, repressed heterosexual. This suggests that Stewie's current confusion isn't a permanent state, but a journey towards self-understanding, and that the journey will eventually lead to him accepting his attraction to men or living in denial and misery. The phrasing is interesting because it presents those as the only two options. No mention of bisexuality or other identities, and it explicitly links repressed heterosexuality with unhappiness, suggesting that denying his true nature would be psychologically damaging. However, MacFarlane later walked back some of these statements, saying that, as a cartoon character, Stewie can be neither straight nor gay in the way real people are. This seeming contradiction, and first saying Stewie is almost certainly gay, then saying he can't have a sexuality because he's a cartoon, reflects the show's ambivalence about definitively answering the question. Family Guy wants to have it both ways, using Stewie's sexuality as a source of humor and character development, while also maintaining enough ambiguity that they never have to fully commit to any particular identity. The most direct and thoughtful exploration of Stewie's sexuality came in the season's 16-episode Send in Stewie, Please. This episode is unusual for Family Guy in that it takes place almost entirely in a single location, a therapist's office, and consists mostly of a conversation between Stewie and his therapist, Dr. Pritchfield, voiced by Sir Ian McKellen. The setup is that Stewie pushed another boy, Tyler, down the stairs at school, and he's been sent to therapy to discuss why he did it. The episode is packed with references to gay culture, from Stewie's knowledge of Bethany Frankel from Real Housewives of New York City, to his comment about trying to get Adele tickets. He immediately clocks Dr. Pritchfield as gay, which establishes a dynamic where both characters are dancing around the central question. Stewie eventually admits that he pushed Tyler down the stairs because he likes him, not like him likes him, but then catches himself and says he's not gay. He preemptively tells Dr. Pritchfield to calm down, saying, "I can already see you licking your chops. I'm sure you live for the coming out sessions." What follows is a remarkably nuanced conversation for Family Guy. Stewie insists he's not gay, while simultaneously displaying an encyclopedic knowledge of gay culture expressing attraction to men like Grant Gustin, who plays the Flash, and showing clear discomfort with having to discuss his feelings. He says, "If anything, I'm less gay than I used to be," which is a fascinating admission that he considers his younger self to have been more openly gay. He acknowledges that nobody at his school would care if he came out, removing external homophobia as a barrier and making it clear that the only person preventing Stewie from accepting his sexuality is Stewie himself. The episode also reveals that Stewie's British accent is fake, something he's putting on to set himself apart from others. As he explains to Dr. Pritchfield, he chooses to speak with a British accent because it justifies feeling different from everyone else. And this is a profound moment of vulnerability, because it shows that Stewie's entire persona, the sophisticated British baby genius, is at least partially performance. It's armor against a world he doesn't feel he fits into. The accent gives him permission to be different, to feel superior, to maintain distance from people who might hurt him if he let them get close. When Dr. Pritchfield pushes him on this, asking if the accent is his way of handling the confusion and pressure of discovering his identity, Stewie becomes defensive. He doesn't have a clear answer about his sexuality, and the episode doesn't give him one. It ends with Stewie leaving therapy no more resolved than when he arrived, still in denial, or at least still unwilling to put a definitive label on himself. The episode is titled Send in Stewie, Please, and it's a reference to the Stephen Sondheim song Send in the Clowns, which is about disappointment, regret, and the pain of miscommunication. Another nod to gay culture and to the idea that Stewie's journey isn't a comedic one, but something more melancholy and difficult. Writer Gary Janetti, who wrote Send in Stewie, Please, said in interviews that the episode represents an important moment in Stewie's journey, but not the end of it. He emphasized that Stewie is intelligent enough to recognize the therapist as gay immediately and to understand what the session represents. But he's not ready to take the next step. He's wrestling with something that isn't easy, and the episode honors that difficulty rather than making it a punchline. Importantly, the show has also included episodes where Stewie expresses attraction to women, and most notably in Damn It, Janet, where he falls in love with a female toddler named Janet. These episodes complicate the narrative because they suggest Stewie might be bisexual rather than exclusively gay, or that his sexuality is genuinely fluid and still forming. MacFarlane has addressed this too, saying at different times that Stewie could be gay, could be bisexual, or could be experiencing the kind of confused attraction that many people experience while figuring out their identity. The show's refusal to provide a definitive answer frustrates some viewers who want clarity, but it also allows for Stewie to be in a perpetual state of questioning, which might be more realistic for a character who's technically only 1 year old. There's also the question of whether it's appropriate to discuss a baby's sexuality at all, and the show acknowledges this meta-question occasionally, with characters and even the writers themselves noting that Stewie is 1 year old and that discussing the sexuality of an infant is inherently strange. But the show also treats Stewie as having the mind of an adult, making it less about a baby's sexuality and more about an adult consciousness trapped in a baby's body, dealing with adult questions of identity and desire. It's a unique situation that only works in the context of an animated sitcom, and the show walks a fine line in trying to handle it with some degree of sensitivity, while also mining it for comedy. The evolution of Stewie's sexuality parallels the evolution of LGBTQ representation in media more broadly. When Family Guy started in 1999, openly gay characters in mainstream animation were rare, and the humor around gay characters was often based on mockery rather than inclusion. Over the 20-plus years the show has been on the air, cultural attitudes have shifted dramatically, and the show has shifted with them. Modern Stewie's sexuality is treated less as a punchline and more as a legitimate aspect of his character, reflecting changing social norms and the show's own maturation. What's particularly interesting is how Stewie's sexuality intertwines with his other character development. As he became less villainous, more emotionally vulnerable, and more concerned with friendship and connection, his sexuality became more foregrounded. Based on this parallel evolution, one interpretation would suggest that Stewie's early evil wasn't just about wanting power, but was also connected to confusion and repression, and McFarlane himself drew this connection in interviews, saying that Stewie's desire to kill Lois and take over the world comes from a lot of aggression, which comes from confusion and uncertainty about his orientation. In this psychological reading, acknowledging and accepting his sexuality isn't just about identity, it's about resolving the internal conflict that drove his violent behavior. This psychological framework offers one way to understand Stewie's evolution as more coherent. Rather than randomly stopping his villainous behavior, this interpretation suggests he stopped being evil because he started processing his confusion, accepting himself, and forming genuine connections with others, particularly Brian. His sexuality isn't separate from his character development in this reading, but integral to it. The more he accepts himself, the less he appears to need to lash out at the world. The more he allows himself to be vulnerable, the less he needs to hide behind violence and megalomania. Modern Stewie, the campy, musical theatre-loving, emotionally open version we see in recent seasons, could be understood not as a betrayal of early Stewie, but as the result of that character finally starting to figure himself out. Of course, Family Guy being Family Guy, the show hasn't always handled this with perfect grace. There are still plenty of episodes where Stewie's sexuality is played purely for laughs, where the joke is just gay baby doing gay things in a stereotypical way. The show sometimes relies on the hoary stereotypes about gay men, having Stewie be obsessed with fashion, catty and judgmental, and knowledgeable about pop culture in ways that align with gay male stereotypes. These moments can feel reductive, turning Stewie into a collection of tropes rather than a fully realized character. But even these less thoughtful moments are part of the larger tapestry of his development, showing a character in process, a show grappling with how to handle a complex topic within the constraints of a comedy format. The question of where Stewie's sexuality goes from here remains open. Will the show ever have him explicitly come out? Will they continue to maintain the ambiguity indefinitely? Will they address it with more seriousness or continue to play it mostly for laughs? As of the most recent seasons, the show seems content to let Stewie exist in this liminal space, clearly gay-coded, but never quite saying the words, allowing viewers to read into the character what they want, while maintaining plausible deniability. For some viewers, this feels like cowardice, a refusal to commit to representation. For others, it feels like an honest depiction of someone still figuring themselves out, which is itself a valid form of representation. What's undeniable is that Stewie's sexuality, however ambiguous it remains, is now a core part of his character in a way that his evil plans and his desire to kill Lois used to be. When people think of modern Stewie, they think of the flamboyant, musical, possibly gay baby, not the gun-toting, matricidal maniac. This shift represents one of the most dramatic character evolutions in animated television, and it's a shift that would not have been possible without the other major relationship in Stewie's life, his friendship with Brian Griffin. The relationship between Stewie and Brian is the emotional heart of modern Family Guy, and it's the relationship that allowed Stewie to evolve from villain to protagonist. Brian, the family dog, is the only character who has always been able to understand Stewie without ambiguity. While other family members might sometimes comprehend him and sometimes not, Brian hears every word Stewie says and responds accordingly. This makes Brian unique in Stewie's life, the one being who can serve as a real companion rather than someone Stewie has to manipulate or deceive. Their relationship started antagonistically. In early seasons, Stewie treated Brian with contempt, viewing him as just another inferior being to be used for his schemes. Brian, for his part, was often annoyed by Stewie, seeing him as a bratty kid with dangerous toys. But over time, as Stewie spent more time outside the house on his various adventures, he needed a companion, and Brian was the only one available. The time travel episodes, particularly the Road to series, forced them together in high-stakes situations where they had to rely on each other. And somewhere in those adventures, something unexpected happened. They became best friends. The Road to episodes are named after the classic Bob Hope and Bing Crosby Road to movies from the 1940s and 1950s, a series of comedy films where the two stars would travel to exotic locations and get into misadventures. Seth MacFarlane is a huge fan of classic Hollywood musicals and comedies, and the Road to episodes are his homage to that tradition. But they're also the episodes where the show gets to be most experimental, taking Stewie and Brian out of Quahog and dropping them into situations that force them to work together and reveal new aspects of their characters. Road to Rhode Island from Season 2 was an early example, focusing on Brian's search for his mother. When Brian discovers that his mother is dead and has been stuffed by a taxidermist, Stewie is there to comfort him, showing a capacity for empathy that contradicted his villainous persona. This moment was significant because it showed Stewie could care about someone else's pain, that beneath the evil genius was someone capable of genuine feeling. The episode ends with Stewie giving Brian space to grieve, a surprising moment of emotional maturity from a character who usually showed no such sensitivity. Road to Germany, which we discussed earlier, deepened their partnership by putting them in genuine danger and forcing them to trust each other. Road to Rupert, where they traveled to Aspen, Colorado, to retrieve Stewie's teddy bear, showed Brian putting up with Stewie's obsession with a stuffed toy, because he understands how much Rupert means to Stewie. The episode includes a musical number, where Brian and Stewie perform together to rent a helicopter, demonstrating that they work well as a team, even when their goals seem ridiculous. Road to the Multiverse is arguably the creative peak of the series, taking them through multiple parallel universes with wildly different visual styles and realities. In one universe, humans and dogs have reversed roles, with dogs as the intelligent species and humans as pets. Brian is thrilled by this world and initially refuses to leave, but Stewie eventually convinces him to come home by reminding him that their friendship transcends species or social hierarchy. It's a sweet moment that cements their bond as genuine and reciprocal, rather than just Stewie dragging Brian along on adventures. Road to the North Pole took them to meet Santa Claus, only to discover that Santa is burned out and barely functional, unable to keep up with the demands of modern Christmas. Stewie and Brian work together to save Christmas, showing that their adventures aren't just selfish, but can have altruistic goals. This episode was the first hour-long Road to episode and received multiple Emmy and Grammy nominations, proving that the Stewie-Brian dynamic had become one of the show's most popular elements. But the most emotionally significant Road to episode, the one that definitively proved these characters had become more than joke delivery systems, came with Road to Rhode Island. Wait, I already mentioned that one. Let me correct myself. The most emotionally significant one is actually a debate between fans, but many point to the non-Road episode Brian and Stewie from Season 8 as the pinnacle of their relationship. This episode, sometimes called a bottle episode, because it takes place entirely in one location with just two characters, locks Stewie and Brian in a bank vault over a weekend with no way out and no other characters appearing at all. What follows is 22 minutes of just Stewie and Brian talking, arguing, bonding, and revealing truths about themselves. The episode gets surprisingly dark. I'm with Stewie having a diaper crisis that Brian must help with, leading to both comedic and genuinely uncomfortable moments. But it also has scenes of profound emotional honesty. Brian admits his insecurities, his failures, his sense that he's wasted his potential. Stewie reveals his fears, his loneliness, his need for connection. They discuss suicide, with Brian admitting he's considered it, and Stewie talking him through the reasons to keep living. The episode strips away all the usual Family Guy trappings, no cutaway gags, no musical numbers, no side characters or subplots. It's just two friends stuck together, and that's enough to sustain an entire episode because the relationship has become that rich and that meaningful. The episode received critical acclaim and is often cited as one of Family Guy's best, proving that the show was capable of genuine depth when it focused on the Stewie-Brian dynamic. When Brian died in the Season 12 episode Life of Brian, hit by a car and killed seemingly permanently, it was a major event in the show's history. Stewie tried desperately to rebuild his time machine to go back and save Brian, but he couldn't obtain a crucial component because the only supplier had died. The show introduced a new dog, Vinny, to replace Brian, and it seemed like the death might be permanent. Fans were outraged, launching campaigns and petitions to bring Brian back. The show milked the controversy for several episodes before finally bringing Brian back in Christmas Guy, where Stewie found the component he needed and traveled back to save Brian. The entire Brian death arc, controversial as it was, served to demonstrate how important Brian had become to Stewie and to the show as a whole. Stewie was willing to destroy the time machine to prevent temporal accidents, but when Brian died, he immediately tried to rebuild it because saving his best friend was more important than the stability of the timeline. Brian's death and resurrection reinforced that the Stewie-Brian relationship is the emotional core of modern Family Guy, the one relationship the show couldn't function without. But the relationship isn't one-sided or perfect. Brian is often hypocritical, pretentious, and flawed in ways that Stewie calls him out on. Stewie can be cruel, manipulative, and dismissive of Brian's feelings. They fight, sometimes violently. In some episodes, Stewie has beaten Brian bloody over perceived slights. In others, Brian has abandoned or betrayed Stewie when his own interests were at stake. Their friendship is messy and complicated, which makes it feel more real than if it was simply a wholesome buddy dynamic. The relationship also serves specific narrative functions for both characters. For Stewie, Brian is his window into the adult world, someone who treats him like an equal rather than a baby. Brian takes Stewie's ideas seriously, engages with him intellectually, and doesn't patronize him. This validation is crucial for Stewie's development. For Brian, Stewie is the one being who doesn't judge him for his failures. Brian's life is largely defined by unfulfilled potential, abandoned projects, and a sense that he's not living up to what he could be. Stewie doesn't care about any of that. He likes Brian for who he is, not who he should be. And this acceptance allows Brian to be vulnerable in ways he can't be with anyone else. The Stewie-Brian dynamic also allows the show to tell different kinds of stories. Episodes focused on Peter and the guys tend to be broad physical comedy. Episodes focused on Lois or Meg are often about family dysfunction. But episodes with Stewie and Brian can be science fiction adventures, road trip comedies, character studies, or even experimental episodes that push the boundaries of what animated sitcoms can do. The relationship gives the show flexibility and creative range, which has helped Family Guy stay fresh over 2 decades on the air. There's also a subtext to the relationship that the show occasionally acknowledges. Stewie clearly loves Brian, possibly romantically, though the show maintains ambiguity about what kind of love it is, and there are moments where Stewie seems jealous of Brian's girlfriends, possessive of Brian's time and attention, and deeply hurt when Brian prioritizes others over him. Some of this can be read as the attachment of a child to a caretaker figure, but given everything we know about Stewie's sexuality and his emotional needs, it's also possible to read deeper romantic or sexual undertones, feelings that Stewie himself might not fully understand or be able to articulate. The show plays with this ambiguity, occasionally dropping hints that Stewie's feelings for Brian go beyond friendship, but never quite confirming or denying it. In the episode The Former Life of Brian, Stewie develops a strong crush on Brian's son Dylan, which Brian finds deeply uncomfortable. In other episodes, Stewie has fantasized about Brian or made suggestive comments about wanting physical intimacy. Whether these are genuine expressions of desire or just the show being provocative is left deliberately unclear. What's clear is that Stewie needs Brian in a way that transcends normal friendship, and that need has become fundamental to who Stewie is as a character. As Stewie evolved from villain to friend, from lone wolf to partnership with Brian, his other relationships also developed in interesting ways. While Brian remains his closest companion, Stewie has formed connections with other characters over the years, though none as deep or consistent. His relationship with Rupert, his teddy bear, remains important even as Stewie has grown beyond his early evil phase. Rupert is still his confidant, the one he talks to when alone. I'm the one who represents comfort and continuity in Stewie's life. The episode Road to Rupert, where Stewie crosses the country to retrieve Rupert after Brian accidentally sells him, shows just how important this teddy bear remains to Stewie's emotional stability. Stewie's relationships with his family members are more complicated. He refers to Peter as the fat man and treats him with contempt in most interactions. There's little warmth or connection between Stewie and his father, and Peter rarely acknowledges Stewie as anything more than a baby to be occasionally supervised. This distant relationship contrasts sharply with Stewie's bond with Lois, which has undergone the most dramatic transformation of any relationship in the show. Remember that Stewie originally wanted to kill Lois, blamed her for his 9 months in the womb, and treated her as his primary antagonist. By later seasons, that animosity has completely disappeared. Modern Stewie occasionally calls Lois Mom instead of by her first name, shows affection toward her, and seems to have genuinely bonded with her. In Stewie Loves Lois, He becomes obsessed with Lois after she comforts him during a nightmare, showing a desperate need for maternal love that contradicts everything about early Stewie. When she fails to reciprocate his neediness at the level he wants, he switches back to hating her, demonstrating that Stewie's emotions toward his mother remain complicated and somewhat unstable. But the episode proved that Stewie was capable of loving Lois, that the homicidal rage had softened into something more typical of a mother-child relationship, even if it was still twisted by Stewie's particular psychology. His relationship with Meg is minimal. They rarely interact, and when they do, Stewie usually treats her with the same casual disdain that everyone in the Griffin family shows toward Meg. She's aware of his time machine, as revealed in the episode Family Cat, where she complains about how noisy it is, but she doesn't seem particularly interested in his adventures or his inner life. Chris, on the other hand, has become one of the few people other than Brian who can reliably understand Stewie, and they've formed something of a bond. Chris is simple-minded but good-hearted, and Stewie seems to appreciate his brother's lack of judgment and agenda. When the three of them go on a time travel adventure together in Stewie, Chris and Brian's excellent adventure, it's Chris who ends up causing chaos by stealing the return pad. But even then, Stewie treats him more with exasperation than real anger. Outside the family, Stewie has had various romantic and sexual interests over the years, though these are complicated by his age and his uncertain sexuality. His relationship with Janet in Damn It Janet is presented as genuine puppy love, with Stewie experiencing all the confusion and intensity of first love despite being a toddler. When Janet breaks up with him, Stewie is heartbroken in a way that seems authentic rather than played for pure comedy. This episode is often cited by people who argue Stewie might be bisexual rather than exclusively gay, showing that he's capable of feeling romantic attraction to women as well as whatever he feels for men, and he's had rivalries and conflicts with other babies at preschool, though none as significant as his rivalry with Bertram. He occasionally interacts with other children on the playground or at school, usually as their superior or their ruler, maintaining his sense of intellectual dominance even as he's become less actively evil. He's formed temporary alliances with various characters for specific schemes or episodes, but these rarely develop into ongoing relationships. Stewie remains fundamentally isolated despite his friendship with Brian, someone who doesn't quite fit in anywhere and doesn't have a peer group of other super genius babies to relate to. This isolation is part of what makes Stewie compelling as a character. He's alone in ways that go beyond the normal loneliness of childhood. He's intellectually alone, had the only baby with genius-level intelligence. He's emotionally alone, unable to process or express his feelings in ways that others can relate to. He's existentially alone, the only being who knows he created the universe, who has traveled through time and seen countless timelines, who understands the fundamental malleability of reality. This cosmic loneliness would be unbearable without Brian, which is why that relationship has become so central. Brian can't fully understand Stewie's experience, but he's willing to try, and sometimes that's enough. As we look at how Stewie has changed from season 1 to present day, the transformation is staggering in scope. He went from wanting to kill Lois to calling her mom, from building weapons of mass destruction to building musical theatre sets for his own performances, and from world domination to wondering if he's brave enough to come out of the closet, from being a villain to being arguably the most emotionally complex and sympathetic character on the show. This evolution happened gradually enough that viewers who watch the show continuously might not realize how dramatic it's been until they go back and watch early episodes. The contrast is shocking. Early Stewie is a completely different character, and not just in terms of what he does, but in terms of who he is fundamentally. Some fans love this evolution, seeing it as the show allowing a character to grow and develop in ways that deepen the emotional stakes and storytelling possibilities. Other fans hate it, viewing it as a betrayal of what made Stewie interesting in the first place. They argue that the show sanded off Stewie's edges and turned him into a generic sassy gay character instead of a unique villain, and lost the transgressive darkness that made him stand out. This debate gets at fundamental questions about character consistency versus character development, whether animated sitcom characters should remain static or be allowed to evolve, and whether Stewie's changes represent natural growth or network pressure to make the character more palatable. Seth MacFarlane has addressed these concerns directly. In a 2009 interview with AV Club, he explained that the decision to move away from Stewie's villainous characterization wasn't conscious, but evolutionary. He said, "It wasn't a conscious decision. Characters evolve in certain ways, and we found that doing the take over the world thing every week was getting played out and was starting to feel a little dated, and it was weirdly feeling a little 90s. And believe me, if we were still doing that, the show would be on its last legs." This suggests the changes were driven by creative necessity rather than outside pressure, a recognition that one-note characters can only sustain a show for so long before becoming stale. MacFarlane also noted that they only half-jokingly follow the guideline that if something might possibly ruin the show, it's a story they should probably do. This willingness to take risks, to potentially alienate fans in service of telling more interesting stories, has defined Family Guy's approach to Stewie. Every major change, from softening his villainy to exploring his sexuality to killing Brian and bringing him back, has been controversial and risky. But these risks have kept the show and the character feeling alive rather than static. The term flanderization derived from The Simpsons character Ned Flanders, who evolved from a well-rounded character into an exaggerated caricature of his most recognizable trait, is often applied to Family Guy characters. Peter has been flanderized into someone almost impossibly stupid and violent. Lois has become more hypocritical and willing to engage in outrageous behavior. Brian has become more insufferably pretentious and hypocritical. But interestingly, Stewie's evolution doesn't quite fit the flanderization model. He hasn't become an exaggerated version of one trait. He's become a different character entirely, which is actually more radical than simple flanderization would be. Modern Stewie is flamboyant, where early Stewie was threatening. He's emotionally vulnerable, where early Stewie was sociopathic. He's focused on relationships, where early Stewie was focused on power. He loves musical theatre, fashion, and pop culture, where early Stewie loved weapons, violence, and domination. Even his voice has changed subtly, with Seth MacFarlane's performance becoming softer and more sing-song in emotional moments, less harsh and imperious than it used to be. These aren't exaggerations of his original traits. These are new traits that have replaced the old ones. Some would argue this isn't character development, but character replacement. That at some point Stewie stopped being Stewie and became someone new, who just happens to have the same name and appearance. There's validity to this criticism, and the connective tissue between early Stewie and modern Stewie is thin enough that they almost seem like different characters from different shows. But there's also an argument that Stewie's evolution represents one of the most ambitious character arcs in animated comedy, a genuine attempt to show a character growing, changing, and finding himself over 2 decades. The fact that Family Guy, a show not known for emotional depth or character consistency, attempted this at all is noteworthy. The fact that they've mostly pulled it off, creating a version of Stewie that millions of viewers connect with despite him being radically different from his origins, is impressive. The key to making this evolution work has been maintaining some consistent elements even as others changed. Stewie's intelligence has remained constant throughout, and he's still a genius with capabilities far beyond normal humans. His inventiveness continues unabated. He still builds incredible devices and solves complex problems. His relationships with Brian and Rupert provide continuity across seasons. His distinctive look, the football-shaped head and the yellow and red outfit, has remained unchanged. And crucially, the show never explicitly acknowledged that Stewie changed. There was no moment where Stewie announced he was giving up on world domination or decided to stop trying to kill Lois. The changes happened organically within the show's reality, allowing viewers to accept them gradually, rather than having to adjust to a sudden transformation. What we're left with is a character who has managed to remain popular and relevant for over 20 years, while undergoing changes that would have destroyed lesser characters. Stewie today is simultaneously exactly what he always was, a precocious baby with a British accent and incredible intelligence, and nothing like he was. A sweet, vulnerable, questioning person instead of a megalomaniacal villain. This paradox is part of what makes him fascinating. He contains multitudes. He's both innocent and worldly, both child and ancient, both killer and friend, both certain of his superiority and deeply insecure about his identity. These contradictions don't break the character. They enrich him, making him unpredictable and compelling in ways that purely consistent characters rarely achieve. As Family Guy moves forward into its 3rd decade, our Stewie will undoubtedly continue to evolve. The show has proven it's willing to take the character in unexpected directions, to explore new facets of his personality, to risk alienating fans who preferred earlier versions. Whether future changes will be as dramatic as the shift from villain to protagonist remains to be seen. But what's certain is that Stewie Griffin has become one of the most complex, controversial, and ultimately beloved characters in animated television. A character who started as a dark joke about an evil baby and became something far more interesting. A meditation on identity, loneliness, friendship, and the struggle to figure out who you really are when the world keeps telling you who you should be. Now let's talk about some of the lingering mysteries and hidden lore that surrounds Stewie's character, or the questions that fans have debated for years, and that the show has either left deliberately ambiguous or contradicted so many times that no clear answer exists. These are the details that don't fit neatly into any timeline, the implications that the show raises but never fully explores, and the fan theories that attempt to make sense of a character who defies conventional analysis. First and most prominently, who is Stewie's real father? The show has dropped hints on multiple occasions that raise questions about Peter's paternity. In the episode And I'm Joyce Kinney, Lois's past as a pornographic actress is revealed, and there's a scene in her film where Lois is about to have sex with a man who bears a striking resemblance to Stewie. Based on this visual similarity, viewers have speculated that Stewie might be the biological son of this actor rather than Peter, which could potentially explain why Stewie is so much more intelligent than Peter and why he looks slightly different from his siblings. However, the show has never definitively confirmed this theory, and other episodes, particularly those involving Bertram, treat Peter as Stewie's biological father without question, suggesting this may have simply been a visual gag rather than intentional foreshadowing. If Stewie isn't Peter's biological son, it would recontextualize many aspects of his character. His contempt for Peter could make more sense within this interpretation. His intellectual superiority would have a genetic explanation under this theory. His sense of not belonging in the Griffin family would be validated by such a revelation. However, it would also create significant problems for the show's continuity, such as how Bertram and Stewie could be half-brothers if Peter isn't Stewie's father, or why Lois has never acknowledged the possibility that Stewie might not be Peter's son. Like many aspects of Family Guy's continuity, this question exists in a state of deliberate ambiguity, both possible and impossible, depending on which episodes you reference. Another persistent mystery is what happens to Stewie's inventions. He builds time machines, weather controllers, mind control devices, cloning equipment, and countless other incredible technologies that could revolutionize civilization or destroy it. But these inventions never seem to persist beyond the episodes they appear in. The time machine gets destroyed and rebuilt multiple times, and the weather controller appears in one episode and is never mentioned again. The shrink ray shows up when needed, then disappears. Where do these inventions go? Does Stewie store them somewhere? Does he dismantle them after use? Does the show simply not care about maintaining this kind of continuity? The most likely explanation is that Family Guy operates on negative continuity, where each episode resets to a default state, and things that happened in previous episodes are remembered or forgotten based on comedic need, rather than logical consistency. This allows Stewie to have built a time machine in one episode, without that fact affecting future episodes, where he builds it again for the first time. It's frustrating for viewers who want coherent world building, but it's also liberating for writers who don't have to keep track of every invention or plot development from hundreds of previous episodes. Related to this is the question of Stewie's resources. Where does he get the materials, the money, the space, and the time to build such elaborate devices? He's a baby with presumably no income, no credit cards, no ability to legally purchase anything. Yet he has access to uranium, exotic metals, advanced computer systems, and all the tools necessary to construct working time machines and matter transporters. The show has never explained this, and likely never will, because explaining it would require establishing rules and limitations that would constrain future storytelling. Some fan theories propose that Stewie hacks into Lois's credit cards to purchase materials online, or that he has access to Lois's family money from the Pewterschmidts, or that he simply steals what he needs. Others suggest that Stewie's genius extends to creating money through stock manipulation, forgery, or other financial crimes. The truth is probably that the show doesn't have an answer, because it's not interested in the question. Within the show's internal logic, Stewie can build whatever he needs because he's a baby genius on a cartoon show, and that appears to be all the explanation required. Then there's the question of Stewie's possible futures. The show has depicted adult Stewie multiple times, but the versions we've seen are contradictory and often unpleasant. In Stu and Stewie's Excellent Adventure, 35-year-old Stewie is revealed to be working at a store, living a mediocre life, having never had sex, never killed Lois, and then never achieved any of his goals. This future depresses young Stewie so much that he actively works to change it, suggesting that timeline may have been averted. In other episodes, we see versions of adult Stewie that range from successful businessman to burned-out failure. but none of these futures are presented as definitive or unavoidable. The lack of a consistent vision for adult Stewie makes sense, given that the show has no intention of ever permanently aging him up. But it also creates interpretive space for viewers to imagine their own versions of what Stewie might become. Will he overcome his insecurities and come out as gay, living openly and happily? Will he remain repressed and unhappy as McFarlane suggested? Will he maintain his genius and use it for good or ill? Will he and Brian remain friends into adulthood? Or will they drift apart as Stewie ages and Brian stays a dog? These questions can't be answered within the show's current format, but they hang over the character, adding depth through their very unanswerability. There's also the mystery of whether anyone in the Griffin family, besides Brian, fully understands that Stewie is a genius. Lois treats him as a baby, but there are moments where she seems aware that something is different about him, that he's more capable and intelligent than a normal child. Peter is too oblivious to notice anything unusual. Meg and Chris seem to pick up on it occasionally, but don't dwell on it. Does Lois know that Stewie has built a time machine? Does she know he was trying to kill her? Does she understand what he's saying when he talks? And the show's inconsistency on the "Shari who can understand Stewie" question makes these determinations impossible. But it's interesting to consider what the implications would be if Lois fully understood everything Stewie said and did. If Lois knows, then her decision to not intervene, to let him keep his dangerous toys and continue his experiments, suggests either extreme negligence or a belief that he's ultimately harmless despite the weapons and the threats. If she doesn't know, then she somehow managed not to notice that her baby has built a time machine in his bedroom and regularly engages in activities far beyond any infant's capabilities. Both possibilities are absurd, which is fitting for Family Guy's approach to logic and realism. The show wants it both ways, and having Stewie's genius be simultaneously secret and obvious depending on what any given scene requires. Another piece of hidden lore concerns Stewie's name, Stuart Gilligan Griffin. Why Stuart? Is there a family tradition or significance to this name that we've never been told? Gilligan, his middle name, is an odd choice that seems deliberately comical, possibly a reference to Gilligan's Island. Does it come from Lois's side of the family or Peter's? The show has never explored the meaning or origin of Stewie's full name, treating it as just the formal version of his nickname. But in a show that often digs into character backstories and family histories, the lack of information about why Stewie is named what he is named feels like a missed opportunity for deeper lore. Fan theories about Stewie abound, are ranging from plausible to completely absurd. Some fans theorize that Stewie is actually from the future, sent back in time to change events, and that his advanced knowledge comes from having already lived through future history. This would explain his knowledge of events and pop culture that predate his birth, though it's contradicted by episodes showing his actual birth and early development. Others theorize that Stewie is actually a human consciousness that accidentally got uploaded into a baby's body, or that he's possessed by some super-intelligent entity, or that he's an experiment by the Pewterschmidt family that went wrong. None of these theories are supported by the show itself, which treats Stewie as simply an inexplicably brilliant baby, with no deeper explanation required. But the fact that fans develop such elaborate theories speaks to the character's complexity and the show's refusal to fully explain him. Stewie remains somewhat mysterious even after hundreds of episodes, and that mystery is part of what keeps him interesting. One fan theory that has more textual support. is that much of what we see Stewie do never actually happens, that it's his imagination or fantasy rather than reality. This would explain why his incredible inventions and adventures never have lasting consequences, why adults sometimes can understand him and sometimes can't, and why the show's continuity regarding his capabilities is so inconsistent. If Stewie is imagining his time machine, his weapons, his battles with Bertram, then the show isn't being inconsistent. It's depicting the fluid reality of a child's imagination. But this theory falls apart when we see other characters, particularly Brian, interacting with Stewie's inventions and experiencing the consequences of his actions. The time machine definitely works in some episodes because Brian uses it. The weather machine affects the entire town. The multiverse remote takes them to verifiable alternate realities. So while some of Stewie's adventures might be fantasy, many are clearly real within the show's universe. There's also the question of Stewie's mortality. He's created the universe, traveled through time, died and been resurrected, experienced multiple possible futures, and generally transcended normal human limitations. One could speculate whether this means he's functionally immortal. Could he die of old age eventually? Or has his manipulation of time and space made him something more than human? The show has never addressed this, but it's worth considering that Stewie might be, in some sense, beyond normal mortality. He's connected to the fabric of reality itself in ways that normal beings aren't. Based on the bootstrap paradox presented in the show, if he dies, one interpretation could suggest the universe might unmake itself, since he's the one who created it through that temporal loop. These are the kinds of questions that Family Guy has no interest in answering definitively, but they add layers of mystique to the character. Stewie exists in a space between mundane and cosmic, between baby and God, between comedy and philosophy. He's a character who can be understood on multiple levels, and from the simple level of funny talking baby to the complex level of existential entity grappling with identity and meaning in a universe he himself created. Most viewers probably aren't thinking about these deeper implications, but they're there for those who want to engage with the character on that level. As we reach the end of our deep dive into Stewie Griffin's complete timeline and hidden lore, it's worth stepping back and considering what this character has meant to popular culture and to the evolution of animated comedy. When Family Guy premiered in 1999, animated sitcoms for adults were still a relatively new phenomenon. The Simpsons had proven the format could work, but there were few other successful examples. South Park was pushing boundaries with crude animation and provocative content, but Family Guy was attempting something different, more polished animation with a mix of cutaway gags, pop culture references, and character-driven stories. Stewie was crucial to Family Guy's identity and success. He was the character who most clearly differentiated the show from The Simpsons and South Park, a creation so unique that he couldn't be easily compared to characters from other shows. There had been evil children in comedy before, and there had been precocious babies, but there had never been anything quite like Stewie Griffin. His combination of sophistication and violence, intelligence and insecurity, villainy and vulnerability made him an instant standout. When people talked about Family Guy in those early years, they talked about Stewie. His cultural impact extended beyond the show itself. See Stewie became a merchandising juggernaut, appearing on countless t-shirts, posters, toys, and other products. His catchphrases entered the popular lexicon, with "Victory shall be mine" and "What the Juice" becoming widely recognized quotes. He was parodied, referenced and homaged in other shows, movies, and media. He became one of those rare animated characters who transcends their source material to become a cultural icon, recognizable even to people who have never watched the show. Stewie has received numerous accolades over the years. Beyond Seth MacFarlane's Emmy win for voicing him, the character has been named to various best character lists by entertainment publications. IGN named him the best Family Guy character. Entertainment Weekly included him in their list of greatest characters of the past 20 years. Our Wizard magazine named him one of the greatest villains of all time, albeit before his character evolution away from villainy. These recognitions speak to Stewie's impact and staying power as a character. The character has also been significant in discussions of LGBTQ representation in animation. While the handling has been inconsistent and sometimes problematic, Stewie represents one of the most prominent potentially gay characters in mainstream animated comedy. Whether he's officially out or not, his character has resonated with LGBTQ viewers who see themselves reflected in his confusion, his mannerisms, and his journey towards self-acceptance. The fact that he's been on television for over 20 years, gradually becoming more explicitly gay-coded over time, represents a slow-motion coming-out story that mirrors the gradual increase in LGBTQ acceptance in American culture over the same period. Stewie has influenced other animated shows and characters that came after him. Shows have featured genius babies, evil children, and characters whose sexuality is treated as ongoing character development rather than fixed from the start. While it's impossible to draw direct lines of influence, Stewie's success and longevity proved that audiences would accept and embrace complex, evolving characters in animated comedy, which has given other shows permission to attempt similar character work. For writers and creators of animated comedies, Stewie represents both a template and a warning. And the template is that audiences will accept radical character evolution if it's done gradually and if it serves the storytelling. The warning is that changing a character too much risks alienating fans who loved the original version. Family Guy has mostly navigated this tightrope successfully with Stewie, maintaining enough consistency to keep him recognizable while allowing enough growth to keep him interesting. But the show's ratings have fluctuated over the years, and some of those fluctuations can be attributed to longtime fans feeling the show has strayed too far from what made it appealing in the first place. Looking at Stewie's complete timeline, from his first appearance in 1999 to the present day, we see a character who has lived multiple lives within the same series. He's been a villain, a time traveler, a creator of universes, a best friend, a questioning youth grappling with sexuality, and a source of both dark comedy and genuine emotion. He's been on television longer than many real people have been alive, yet he remains perpetually 1 year old, frozen in time, while simultaneously experiencing more growth and change than most characters ever do. The hidden lore surrounding him, the unanswered questions and contradictions and mysteries add depth and texture to a character who could easily have been one note. Instead, Stewie Griffin has become one of the richest, most complex characters in animation. Someone who can support deep analysis and interpretation, while also delivering silly jokes and visual gags. He's simultaneously highbrow and lowbrow, sophisticated and juvenile, profound and absurd. These contradictions don't cancel each other out. They compound, and creating something larger and stranger than the sum of its parts. As Family Guy continues, Stewie will undoubtedly continue to evolve. Seth MacFarlane and the writing team have shown they're willing to take risks with the character, to explore new facets of his personality, to potentially confirm things about his identity that have remained ambiguous for decades. Or they might choose to maintain that ambiguity indefinitely, keeping Stewie in a state of perpetual becoming rather than ever fully resolved. Either approach could work because the character has proven flexible enough to support multiple interpretations and directions. What seems certain is that Stewie Griffin will remain a central figure in Family Guy and in animated comedy more broadly for as long as the show continues. He's too popular, too versatile, and too central to what makes Family Guy work to ever be sidelined or replaced. The show has tried to give other characters more prominence at various points, but it always comes back to Stewie, either alone or with Brian, having adventures and experiences that drive the show's most memorable episodes. For viewers who have followed Stewie's journey from the beginning, from the evil baby who wanted to kill his mother, to the confused young person struggling with his identity and finding meaning in friendship, the character represents something unique in television history. He's a record of changing times, changing attitudes, and changing approaches to animated storytelling. He's a reminder that even the most seemingly static characters can grow and change if writers are willing to take chances. And he's proof that audiences will follow a character through dramatic transformations if the fundamental core of what makes them appealing remains intact. Stewie Griffin started as a dark joke, a transgressive idea about putting an adult villain's mind in a baby's body and seeing what comedy could be mined from that juxtaposition. Over time, he became something far more significant, a character who has made people laugh, made them think, made them debate and discuss and care about a 1-year-old cartoon baby with a fake British accent and a complicated relationship with his own identity. That's not just good character work, that's exceptional character work, the kind that stands the test of time and remains relevant and compelling across decades. So as we wrap up this exploration of Stewie Griffin's complete timeline and hidden lore, and it's worth acknowledging what an achievement this character represents, 20 plus years of continuous character development, hundreds of episodes, multiple phases of evolution, countless adventures through time and space and across dimensions, all while maintaining enough core identity that he's still recognizably Stewie. That's rare in any medium, but especially in animated sitcoms, which traditionally rely on static characters and reset buttons. Stewie Griffin is proof that animated characters can be just as complex, layered, and meaningful as any character in live-action drama. He's proof that comedy and depth aren't mutually exclusive. He's proof that audiences are willing to follow a character's journey even when it takes them to unexpected places. And he's proof that sometimes the most interesting stories are the ones that take decades to unfold, one episode at a time, gradually revealing new facets of a character until they've become something you never expected but can't imagine the show without. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the complete timeline and hidden lore of Stewie Griffin, make sure you subscribe to the Cartoon Codex and hit that notification bell so you don't miss future videos exploring the fascinating worlds of animated television. There's always more to discover about the characters we think we know, and we'll be here to explore every detail. See you in the next one.